So after the awful happenings at Australia's iconic Bondi Beach, the big question is anti-Semitism, Islamic terror, now the new global threat in the war against terror. Joining me now, Gideon Falter, Chief Executive, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom, Professor Rohan Gunaratna, Professor of Security Studies at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, editor of the Handbook of Terrorism in Asia Pacific. Dr. Soumya Awasthi is a fellow at the Center for Strategy, Security and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation. And Jitarth Bharadwaj is founder and editor-in-chief at the Australia Today. Appreciate all of you joining us. I want to come to you, Gideon, first, because what we've seen in recent times is a pattern of terror attacks directed at Jewish communities in some parts of the world. And many see it as a fallout also what has been happening in Gaza over the last 24 months. How do you read what you saw happening in Sydney? Is there a pattern that is emerging?
There's absolutely a pattern, and many people will be familiar, of course, with the horrific attack that happened against a Chabad community in Mumbai all those years ago. And for the British Jewish community, there's the very recent memory of the killings in Manchester at a synagogue on Yom Kippur this year. And now, of course, we are seeing this same macabre pattern play out yet again as we see the brutality meted out by Islamist thugs, cowardly thugs, in Sydney against a Jewish community celebrating Hanukkah. And unfortunately, this is a form of terrorism which Israelis are well familiar with. It is a form of terrorism which Indians are well familiar with. But it is a form of terrorism which many in the West, although they've had so many examples of these killings, are still not awake to. And what we're seeing now, I think, is yet again Western politicians failing to understand what they need to do about this, because they're offering thoughts and prayers. They're saying that they must not allow this kind of thing to happen, but they're not giving any specifics about what exactly they're going to do to make sure that we don't keep waking up to breaking news and screens filled with barbaric images.
Can I just push you on this? Do you link it to what happened in Gaza? The general belief that thousands of innocent women and children were killed in Gaza, retaliation, of course, to the terrible attack that Hamas undertook in Israel itself. Is that the cycle of violence?
No, there's no cycle of violence, because the Jews of Sydney had not done anything in anybody's accusations. But this is exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing now a world in which people in the media, but also people on social media, are obsessing about Jews constantly and obsessing about Israel. And they say that Israel, the Jewish state, the one Jewish state in the world, is uniquely evil, that anybody who is Jewish is therefore tainted by this evil and deserves to be murdered. And for anybody who is out there saying that something that happened in Gaza legitimizes thousands of miles away a 10-year-old girl, a young rabbi, father of 5, a Holocaust survivor in the late years of their lives, being murdered in cold blood as they celebrate Hanukkah, not only is such a person sick and deranged, but also such a person is basically propagating Hamas ideology, which says that, and this is the same Islamist ideology used by Islamic State and other Islamist terrorist organizations around the world, which say that Jews deserve to die because they are uniquely evil. And they always find some excuse. If there hadn't been the October 7th atrocity perpetrated by Hamas, there wouldn't have been the war that ensued. And without that war, they would have found some other excuse. Jews have been murdered in cold blood all over the West since long before October 7th. So let's not lose sight of the fact that this is ingrained in Islamist ideology, that Jews need to die, that the West needs to suffer constant barbarity and violence. And anybody trying to make this about something that happened in Gaza is deranged and sick and propagating Hamas ideology.
Professor Rohan Gunaratna, therefore, picking up from what we heard from Gideon, the elephant in the room is Islamic terror, Islamic radicalization. And we are seeing it manifest here in Australia. There is evidence that both these individuals of father, son of Pakistani origin had some links with Islamic State, or at least certainly supported the broader Islamic State ideology. Are we seeing it now acquiring an even more ominous dimension? Because here you have two individuals, they've got their guns and they can go and shoot recklessly in Bondi Beach, relatively an area where you have thousands of tourists. And therefore, this kind of mass shooting makes it even more difficult to actually deal with rising Islamic radicalization of the kind we're seeing play out there in Australia.
Based on the investigation conducted by the Australian security and intelligence community, Naveed Akram was a member of the Islamic State. In fact, his associate was arrested in 2019, and he's still continuing his time in prison. But what is important to understand is that Naveed Akram was known to the security and intelligence community for his support for ISIS or the Islamic State. Of course, he radicalized his father, 50-year-old Sajid Akram. Now, what we need to understand is that there are three things happening. One is that the Muslim community in Australia needs to be better integrated to the Australian host community. Second is that we saw the wave of Al-Qaeda terrorism, the wave of ISIS terrorism, and now we are seeing a third wave of terrorism that is radicalizing the Muslim community. So it is important not to bring the conflicts that are happening in the Middle East into Australia. I have always argued that even in India and in Sri Lanka, in the Maldives, we should not bring what is happening in the Middle East to our own countries and radicalize our communities. Third is, of course, the security and intelligence services should work very closely with each other. India issued a threat warning that there will be attacks against the Jewish targets on Sunday morning, that is December 14th. And that threat warning was shared with a number of countries. I commend India's security and intelligence community for issuing that warning. And I believe that when there are such high-profile events, such as the Festival of the Lights the Jews celebrated, they should have had more security there. There should have been greater alertness and vigilance, and of course, law enforcement officers patrolling that wing.
Can I just ask you for a moment, because you've done a lot of work on Al-Qaeda. We saw the Bali bombings several years ago when the Al-Qaeda was spreading its tentacles across the world. How different is this latest threat to Al-Qaeda? Is it in many ways far more dangerous, perhaps because it could happen anywhere, anytime, with individuals? You don't even need a group anymore.
You are absolutely correct. The Al-Qaeda linked Jamaat Islamiyah staged the Bali attack. 202 people were killed in October 2002, of which 88 were Australians. In fact, that was the biggest loss the Australians suffered. This is what is called a terrorist cell or a terrorist network. It's not by a terrorist group, although they derive the ideology of ISIS or the Islamic State. So what is important to understand is today the groups have fragmented into cells and networks and individuals, lone wolves. So there must be a greater orientation, alertness to detect, to prevent these attacks, because every attack is preceded by 14 indicators: propaganda, fundraising, procurement of weapons, safe houses, vehicles, transportation. All those indicators were seen in the Bondi Beach attack. So law enforcement agencies should work very closely with the community to prevent these attacks. Otherwise, these attacks will become the standard modus operandi of attacks that we will witness in the coming months and coming years.
Dr. Soumya Awasthi, the fact is both the main attackers have been found to be, the two main attackers have been found to be of Pakistani origin, which again brings Pakistan back into the focus as being seen as an epicenter of terror and really been the hub in many ways of this new Islamic State ideology that's spreading its tentacles across the world. How troubling should that be seen, as earlier we've had groups like Jaish and Lashkar, but now you have these lone wolves, so you have smaller terror cells operating not just directed at India, but across the world, emanating out of Pakistan in many ways.
Yes, so I agree with Professor Rohan here, and also I wanted to add that terrorism is no more a event which takes place in closed door. It has become a hydra monster. So there are multiple places where you find this emerging threat, and it's no more restricted to any state which has been very inclusive in society. So we saw the similar kind of act in New Zealand. We saw attack on the Jewish community in India in the Taj attack, and we see constant attack on the Jewish community. And the reason behind it is that this whole radicalization is religious in nature. It's no more people who argue that it's political, social, it's not limited to that, but it definitely has a religious nature. When you talk about the kind of sermons that are given to people to radicalize them, you will often hear them talk about Palestine, talk about Gaza, talk about Al Qaeda's mission. So it's somebody who is highlighting these points is not to support the or propagate the idea of Gaza, but also to highlight that these are very genuine reasons that you keep finding attack on religious backgrounds, on religious notions. And coming to what
Right.
we keep seeing in India, yes, Pakistan's involvement is no more a hidden story. It's everybody knows, whether it is Osama's presence or present when Jaish-e-Mohammed is carrying out the procession of the martyrs, so-called martyrs from their camp, and being attended by the ISI. Secondly, they asking for funding digitally is again something which tells that they are openly
Right.
talking issues, and cyber has to play a bigger role in this, and it definitely does. The online radicalization programs that are running through online social media, through gaming applications, through betting apps, you name it and they have it. So they have it in all forms and shapes now, so you can't really say it's of a particular kind, but it's a combination of multiple issues together which brings this in front of us. And
Right.
no state
Jitarth,
can be secured from this.
Jitarth Jai Bharadwaj, your editor-in-chief at Australia Today. Australia has shown itself in recent times to be an open society in terms of welcoming migrants. In recent times, we've seen a bit of a backlash, but over the years, Australia was seen as having become far more open, particularly to Asian communities. Do you believe what has happened, this terror attack, will now make the Australian authorities, as I asked my Australian journalist earlier in the show, a little bit more cautious now about having tougher gun control laws, but also being tough on immigration?
See, I can't say that immigration will be tightened because of this incident, but definitely the Prime Minister of Australia have a signal that gun control laws will be changed in near future. He's talking to the state and territory attorney generals, and a proposal will be ready as soon as in 2 weeks' time. Right now, any permanent resident who is not citizen of Australia can own a gun with a license. Of course, we don't have a gun culture. Only in certain cases guns are allowed. Either you are in rural community where you need gun for animal control or something, or you are in sporting community. And this gentleman was in sporting community. That's why he had 6 gun licenses. Second thing, yes, there'll be incidents. I mean, what I am seeing is that people who look like me, and the attacker also looked like me. So there will be certain incident in coming weeks, months, or days. We don't know for that. There is anger in Australian community, and I can understand that anger. 15 innocent people are dead right now, and this man, he is responsible just because of his religious hate. He has done that.
Right.
One more point I have to correct, Rasdeep,
But
which is we are not confirmed about the origin of these attackers as of now. So Australian government, any authority has not confirmed where they come from.
It's interesting that you're saying that, because all the reports, of course, clearly suggest that they are of Pakistani origin, at least the reports that I have with me. But Gideon Falter, one of the interesting aspects of this is that one of the heroes, in a way, of what happened was Ahmad al-Ahmad, a fruit seller, who actually disarmed one of the attackers. He is reportedly of Syrian origin. In a sense, the worry, of course, with attacks like that, it leads to growing Islamophobia. So you've got anti-Semitism growing, but you've also got Islamophobia and the demonization of an entire community. But one of the heroes was the 43-year-old man who snatched the gun away. How do you see that? How do you deal with anti-Semitism on one side growing and Islamophobia growing on the other?
Well, they're very different things, and obviously the hero in this story who did disarm the attacker. Of course, when these terrible things happen, often what happens is that you get a lot of people standing around and filming. This is somebody who decided that he was going to act. He didn't stand around and film. He went straight in. He was able to grab one of the gunmen from behind, one of the terrorists. He was able to take his gun from him, and he was able effectively to disarm him. And thankfully, he's making a recovery, as we understand it, in hospital. The reality is that Islamist extremism has been on the rise right across the world, as some of your other contributors have said. And one of the principal fixations and obsessions of Islamists is killing Jews. And so a large part of Islamist operational military effort is engaged in trying to kill Jews. A large part of their propaganda effort is engaged in trying to get people to obsess about Jews, to think, for example, that Israel is on some kind of genocidal rampage and that Jews are somehow all behind it. So anti-Semitism is a very complex hatred, which is driven in large part by Islamist ideology, along with extreme left ideology and extreme right ideology. And in certain places, such as in the United States, you're now starting to see that there are people like Candace Owens, who originally were considered to be of the right wing, who have now become what they call the woke right, where they also are spouting the most outrageous anti-Semitic libels, trying to persuade people to hate Jews. And then, of course, you've got people who are of the left, who are allying increasingly with Islamists in this particularly unlikely alliance, to try to drive hatred against Jews as well. And that's where you get the kind of environment where after Sydney, what we're hearing is people saying, Jews deserve this. You know, someone saying that is basically no better than the kind of Islamist extremist who commits this kind of attack.
I couldn't agree with you more. That is, if anyone says that Jews deserve this, it is a form of hate speech that's purely repugnant. And these kind of violent attacks actually only end up putting Muslims across the world, in a way, in the dock. And therefore, these individuals who claim to stand by Islamic religion are actually doing the greatest damage to Islam that anyone can really do. I appreciate my guests joining me here on the News Today. Thank you all very much from different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you.